Greetings. I want you to notice this sign, Arab or Israeli-Arab war first. Why did I put the word first, right? Why is that there? The answer is God is telling us that the Arab-Israeli war will come first before the nuclear war that many are expecting. Most people in the news media are expecting a nuclear war to result from American weakness and Russia's war in Ukraine. They talk about it almost every day. Others are expecting nuclear war could happen with China if they invade Taiwan, which they are eager to do and showing all kinds of signs of planning it. We just don't know when. God shows that there will be nuclear war after the Arab-Israeli war described in Daniel 11:44. If you look in the Bible, Daniel 11:44 tells us, or Daniel 11:40 is the beginning place, tells us that at the time of the end, in the end times, when things are warming up and getting ready for Jesus Christ to return, at the time of the end, a super powerful military leader is attacked and uses many ships. That's critical to remember. What's many ships? Many ships. Not too many nations have many ships. He's attacked and he uses many ships to counterattack and overwhelm the attacking forces. Then in the next verse, verse 41, that same leader moves his army into Israel, the promised land, God's chosen area, Jerusalem, the holy city, and at the same time captures and overthrows many Arab nations. This is a gigantic world event. Here is how God tells the story in Daniel. Daniel 11:40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. That's critical. And he shall overwhelm them. So he wins in verse 40. Verse 41. He, the same powerful leader with many ships, he shall also enter the glorious land Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown. Not a few countries, but many countries shall be overthrown. Verse 42, and he'll stretch out his hand against the many countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So here in Daniel, God is telling us that future there will be another attack against Israel by many Arab nations. Now, Arab-Israeli wars have happened many, many times in the past, not so much lately, and there's a reason for that, right? If a person asks Google about Arab-Israeli wars, they can see a long list of Arab attacks against Israel since 1948. Israel has defeated those many attacks through the years using mostly tanks and warplanes. The next major Arab attack will be mostly rockets fired from surrounding nations. Recently, a news magazine reported that in the next war, Israel might have to fight on 5, count them, 5 different fronts. Wow, that's a tough thing for any military. Those 5 fronts are as follows. Attacks from the Syrian border, attacks from Gaza, where Hamas is funded by, you guessed it, Iran, right? Attacks from the West Bank, from the Iranian-supported Islamic Jihad. Number 4, attacks from inside the Israeli population itself, where Arabs live in amongst the Jews. And attacks, number 5, attacks from Lebanon, where Hezbollah has, catch this, 100,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel. Can you imagine 100,000 rockets and missiles? That is an immense amount of firepower. Israel is about 100 miles north to south. Most people, unless you've been there, unless you've studied the maps, it's like, wait a minute, the nation of Israel is only about 100 miles north to south, and it's about 50 miles wide. Now, most of us drive more miles than that to and from work. It's a tiny, tiny nation, and it's surrounded by enemy nations, and they have over 100,000 rockets. Now, picture your house situated in Israel, and 100,000 rockets are launched in your direction. That's not going to happen because you don't live in Israel. Humanly speaking, most people would say Israel does not stand a chance. But God keeps telling us in the book of Daniel that Israel does not get destroyed by the massive World War III sized battle from the many Arab nations. Again, we remind ourselves what God says in Daniel 11:41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. In verse 43, God specifically names 3 of the Arab nations that are going to be overthrown. Daniel 11:43, he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over the precious things of Egypt, also the Libyans, Libya, also the Ethiopians, Ethiopia. So now we have 3 of the many Arab nations have been named, and we get an understanding that it's total control of their nation. Now, Hitler in World War II overthrew France and took power, total control over all the precious things of France. Once the attack against Israel has begun, many Arab nations will join in, excited at the thought of pushing Israel into the sea, which they have been publicly saying and wanting for decades. And when this comes, they'll be so excited that it's actually going to be happening. The previously mentioned magazine also reported that the Iranian foreign minister recently toured southern Lebanon and stared, apparently for quite a while, into Israeli territory. Why was he staring? Well, it becomes clear. Shortly after that, he publicly announced that Iran would destroy Tel Aviv and Haifa, 2 of Israel's greatest cities. The Israeli Prime Minister has said 95% of the Israeli security threats are from one nation, you guessed it, Iran. When the giant Middle Eastern war begins, we should expect that Iran will be one of the nations to be overthrown. It's also reported that Iran has supplied Russia with high-tech combat drones to assist in the war against Ukraine. So we know whose side Iran is on, Russia's. Only 3 superpower nations have many combat ships. Russia's one of them. Now, if Russia and Iran are allies, it's impossible to think that superpower Russia would save Israel from an Iranian attack. So God is telling us that at the time of the end, a superpower army with many ships, key words, will save Israel from destruction at the hands of many Arab nations. This is beyond a World War III sized event. Daniel 11:40, at the time of the end, verse 41, he, the many ship superpower, shall enter the glorious land Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown. Verse 42, he shall stretch out his hand against the many countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Now, verse 43, and he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over the precious things of Egypt, also the Libyans and the Ethiopians. Next, God shows that while the superpower nation with many ships is in Israel, saving them from an Arab attack, 2 other enemy nations attack the first superpower. It's in Daniel 11, verse 44, which reads, "But news from the east and the north shall trouble him." Okay, we stop there because the average person reading, this verse, news from the east. East? There's a lot of stuff to the east. And news from the north. Oh, well, there's a lot of stuff from the north, right? Trouble him. So after reading this, we should stop and ask, which enemy armies are north and east of Jerusalem? Why Jerusalem? Because he moved his army into Israel and around Jerusalem to save them from the Arab attacks. A quick look at a world map shows a superpower nation that is north of Jerusalem and another superpower nation that is east of Jerusalem. Now we notice that the news about these two superpowers troubles him. Daniel 11:44. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Well, how bad is that, right? And God uses the second trumpet to reveal what this news is all about. So we go to Revelation 8:8. The second angel sounded. Now what's that? That's the second trumpet sounded, and this is the second trumpet of a 7-trumpet sequence. So back to verse 8. Then the second angel sounded, and a third of the sea became blood. Now, when in Egypt, when they said the fish, the sea became blood, the Nile River became blood, the fish died. It was blood. God made it into blood, right? Okay. Not that this is a God event, right? Because it's a different kind of event, as we'll soon see. So 3 great things happen during this trumpet event, trumpet number 2. The first is that a third of the sea turns to blood, which is, we're not used to that from a man-made event. The next 2 great things are shown in verse 9. And a third of the living creatures in the sea died. And you could say, well, okay, if a third of the sea turned to blood, then you would expect a third of the creatures in the sea to die because they don't live in blood. But then comes the clincher, and a third of the ships in the sea were destroyed. Now in World War II, many combat ships were destroyed, but generally 1 ship at a time, right? And a bunch of other ships would be shooting at it, or torpedoes would be dropped, and a ship would go down, and maybe in a big, several ships versus several ships, a couple of ships got sunk in one battle, right? But generally most ships got sunk 1 at a time or a couple at a time. It is seldom mentioned in the news media that Russia and China have a nuclear weapon known as a fleet killer. It's a nuclear missile that explodes above an aircraft carrier and all of the other support ships, known as the fleet. America has about 14 such fleets deployed all around the world. Back when the Rocket Man of North Korea was making trouble, 3 American fleets, their aircraft carrier and all their support ships, approached North Korea, and wow, all of a sudden things settled down, and the American president was invited by the North Korean Rocket Man to step into North Korea, an unheard of thing. Now back to finish out Daniel 11:44, news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore, this is how troubling the news is. He shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. Pretty powerful language, right? Aimed at the military north of Jerusalem and the military east of Jerusalem, 2 superpowers. The obvious question here is, if the friend of Israel's superpower has deployed a huge army to capture and overthrow many Arab nations, that's going to take a lot of effort. There's no capacity left to fight another war with boots on the ground somewhere else in the world. After trumpet 2, where a third of the ships in the sea are destroyed, God uses trumpet number 4 in Revelation 8:12 to reveal the results of Daniel 11:44. So Revelation 8:12, then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them was darkened. And you go, a third of the sun, what? And a third of the moon, and a third, what is all that? Okay, stopping at this point, we ask, why are a third of the sun and the moon and the stars no longer visible on earth? The answer becomes more clear in the last words of this same verse. So a fourth angel sounded, a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. Now comes the last part. A third of the day did not shine. Likewise, the night. Okay, in a 24-hour period, the sun shines on the land for about 12 hours. Doesn't matter where you are, right? Unless you've got lots of clouds, right? Where you are on planet Earth, the sun shines, if it's a good sunny day, right, for about 12 hours, and then the moon and the stars are seen during about a 12-hour period, the nighttime period. Now, a third of a 24-hour day is an 8-hour time block. You divide 24 hours into 3, and you get an 8-hour time block. So God is showing us that a nuclear war will occur and result in nuclear winter situation over an 8-hour time block region. Now, if you Google nuclear winter, it's an interesting exercise. You can learn the devastating effects of nuclear winter, where the sun and the moon and the stars are no longer visible on that part of the land. It's devastating. So people in the news media talk like nuclear war could happen any time soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, right? God has spelled out that first comes the Arab-Israeli war, and then comes the nuclear war. Most of the news items in this presentation came from a Newsmax magazine, if you want to go back and check. Many people have trouble believing the words of the Bible. When World War III is on the TV news and the world watches Israel being saved from many Arab nations, people should realize that God is all-powerful and in total control of human destinies. God wants people to know and to trust Him so that He shows the future events long. Daniel was written thousands of years ago, long before they become reality. Daniel wrote it down. Daniel didn't fully understand it, but it's been sitting there in the Old Testament book of Daniel for all these thousands of years, and now we're in the end times and they're becoming a reality. So when you see Egypt is captured and many Arab nations overthrown, I hope you will study Daniel chapter 11 and learn more about our great Creator God.